Hello and welcome to this episode of Quartermaster. It's been a long time since we've done the show Quartermaster, but after a hiatus, we're back and we have with us Saurabh Mukherjea, who is the founder of Marcellus Investment Managers, and we have Nandita Rajhansa, who's an economist with Marcellus. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad, for hosting us. It's a pleasure being back on Quartermaster.
Absolutely. And so now the topic that we're going to talk about today is, and as we do in Quartermaster, is about transformations that are taking place in India's economy and society and how they are related. And so today we're going to be talking to you about research that Marcellus has done about this new emerging elite in India. It's not the old elite that we know. It's a new breed that's coming up, and it looks like it's here to stay. So now let me kick off things with not who the elites are, but what are the structural transformations that have happened, say, over the last decade that have led to the growth of this new elite?
So at a conceptual level, Sharad, what's happened over the last 30 years or so, basically the time since India liberalized its economy in 1991, is what's happened is we've consolidated the economy, we've networked the economy in a variety of ways, right? And that networking, that consolidation has driven economic growth, which in turn has created opportunities for a new economic elite, for a new educated economic elite to rise in India. So let me just explain the networking first, and then we'll go on to the economic growth, right? So if you take, for instance, the National Highway Network, the National
Right.
Highway Network has actually trebled. It's trebled in the last 20 years, right? If you look at airline passenger traffic, it's gone up around 15, 16x in the last 2 decades, right? If you look at internet connectivity, I think around 52% of Indians are on the net today. That's 4x in the last 10 years, and I think it's close to 16x in the last 20 years. So, a variety of types of economic connectivity, whether it is roads, whether it is airlines, whether it is the net, is up anywhere between 15 to 20x. And then comes GST, right? Till 2017, we were 25 states. Each state had its own indirect tax regime. We were basically 25 fragmented economies, right? And then GST comes, integrates into one indirect tax regime for the whole country, one nation, one indirect tax. And that gives you
Absolutely.
an integrated economic bloc of $3.5 trillion, the world's fifth largest economy, right? The result of all of this is nearly 30 years, more than a generation of sustained economic growth around the 6 7% number, right? And it's been pretty consistent. It doesn't matter who's been in power, doesn't matter whether Lehman was happening in America, something else was happening in America, which American president has been in charge has also been broadly relevant. Whether China was hot or China was cold, India grows at roughly 6 7%. Now, if you
Right.
take 6% growth over 30 years, that's a 6 to 7x real terms, 6 to 7x multiplication in the size of the economy, right? 6 to
Absolutely.
7x growth in the size of the economy over a generation. And that's what's propelled the rise of a new economic elite. Smart people, hardworking people, driven people who have capitalized on the opportunities of the last 30 years are the people who we describe as the new economic elite. Now, that's this as a conceptual level. Over the last 10 years, three specific developments have made the consolidation, the networking of the economy even more real. And I'll request our economist Nandita to elaborate on those three specific developments which have taken place in the last decade.
So, three sets of changes that have happened. The first one, giving an identity to all 1.3 billion people in this country. That gives you a sense of identity, which was not the case before Aadhaar was rolled out. So, that's the first lever of change. The second lever of change is awarding or giving access to banking or formal sector credit to everyone in the country using Jan Dhan bank accounts. So, someone like an auto rickshaw driver outside our office or a maid that comes and cooks meals in our homes can get access to formal sector or something like an HDFC bank credit opportunity for their daily livelihood. So that's the kind of change that we're talking about. So the Jan Dhan bank accounts or bank accounts from 2015 rose nearly 3x until today. So that's 100 crore bank accounts in 2015 to 300 crores as of today. So that's the second lever of change. The third lever of change would be the proliferation of affordable smartphones as well as affordable internet. So, courtesy Geo in 2017, all of India virtually got access to high-speed internet as well as affordable smartphones, which could be leveraged to do a lot of things. So this is in effect the Jam Trinity that a lot of people keep talking about, and it has
Right.
huge ramifications.
So yeah, that's actually it. Now the government keeps talking about the Jam Trinity, but from what you're saying, also the M part of the Jam Trinity is coming from the private sector. So what's driving this change actually is a partnership between the government and the private sector, right?
Absolutely. So it's partly government sponsored, it's partly private sponsored, but the total impact of this whole Jam Trinity coming into play has been that access to information has been democratized, access to finance has been democratized, and both of these things have been enabled of sorts because of Aadhaar. So this works into a very nice ecosystem of sorts on which maybe the unified payments interface, which is UPI, has been built on. So that gives you easier payment access or access to easier payments throughout your daily livelihood. So, just to give you an instance, for example, in Kolhapur, which is a tier 2 town in Maharashtra, there might be a lady who's selling apparel. She would be doing that even before all of these changes happened. But now, what has changed in her line of business is that because of Aadhaar, it's far easier for her to set up a new business or maybe open a new warehouse because she can get access to land or any kind of financing. For example, she can go to a bank and get it. Aadhaar has been an enabler. Jandan bank account has been an enabler here. She can get easily working capital loans because of the history that UPI creates, again, which has been enabled in a way because of Jandan and Aadhaar. She can also advertise her apparel throughout the country. She can showcase it on the internet, on social media, and that gives her a reach of all the entire country, basically 1.3 billion people or whoever has access to internet.
Right.
So that increases her market size, total addressable market, quite
And the
extensively.
remarkable thing, Sharad, is Nandan Nilekani told me all of this 12, 13 years ago. So when he joined UIDAI, and he launched Aadhaar, just as he finished that first hectic phase of work, I bumped into him in Bangalore airport 12, 13 years ago. And he was able to figure out then, he was able to figure out then the power of Aadhaar to transform India, and the consequences that Nandita spoke about. The great man was able to foresee this 12, 13 years ago.
So, all right. So now you've identified what the drivers have been for the rise of this new elite. So let's get into
Yeah,
what the first category, because the research that you've sent along that this conversation is based on, you've identified three different categories
yeah,
of elites that have emerged. So
yeah.
what's the first one?
I think the first one is the standard Indian graduate. So non IIT, non IIM, non foreign educated, the regular Indian graduate, BCom, BSc, right? And for a large part of my lifetime, if you didn't go to an elite academic institution, IIT, IIM, or elite colleges such as St. Stephen's or St. Xavier's, life could be pretty tricky. But what's really interesting about the last decade is many of the executives, many of the entrepreneurs who are rising are just regular college graduates. So, for example, I live in Mumbai, and I've seen at close quarters this gentleman called Kunal Shah. He's a philosophy graduate from Wilson College in Bombay, right? And he was the guy who created First Charge, and he sold it to Axis Bank, I think 6 or 7 years ago. Then subsequently, he's a serial entrepreneur. He went on to create Cred, which is now one of the unicorns in our country, right? And there are many other examples like Kunal Shah, people from non-elite backgrounds, entrepreneurial, intelligent, hardworking people who are who are making fortunes, building companies. And if you sort of put it quantitatively, Shahid, if you put it sort of try to quantify this phenomenon, what Nandita and I did 6 months ago was we looked at the board directors of the Nifty 50 companies, right? The executive directors and promoters of Nifty 50 companies. This is sort of the apex of corporate India. This is sort of Mount Everest of corporate India, if you want to put it like that. And what was really interesting was in FY23, the year ending March 23, we found for the first time the majority of the directors of the Nifty 50 companies were neither IIT nor IIM, nor from foreign universities. These are regular Indian graduates, and the rise of such people, the rise of the locally educated entrepreneurial mindset individual who rises to high office in corporate life or goes on to build a unicorn. This is very unusual in India. This is a very recent phenomenon, only in the last decade. If you had looked at the Nifty 50 as it stood 20 years ago, right, and the Nifty 50 as it stood 20 years ago, the regular Indian graduate only accounted for roughly a third of the board positions on the Nifty. 20 years ago, it was really important to go to an elite institution. I remember when I was growing up in Delhi in the 80s, my parents used to be virtually terrified of my future because their worry was that my parents' worry was this our son, the worry was our son isn't bright enough to get into IIT. My dad himself is an IIT graduate, so he was even more mortified that this boy will never make it to
More
IIT.
than
What will happen?
bright enough, right? Because I mean, of course, the
Right.
institution doesn't really determine whether you're
So,
bright or
so
not.
back then that had no this sort of my explanation. Like I used to, what you're saying, it's music to my ears. I wish you had been there when I was in class 8, 9, 10. When I used to say things like this, my parents would say, "Look, none of this nonsense is going to work. You're going to study hard. Either get into an IIT. Hopefully, one day you'll get into an IIM, or if you want to do medicine, get into AIMS. Think about elite education because without that, my parents' point of view was, you're not going to amount to much in life. That is now comprehensively destroyed. That notion is comprehensively destroyed. Where
That's
you
fantastic.
study is no longer where you study is no longer a determinant of where you end up in business life in India. You could be a regular graduate and you could go on to create $1 billion company. And we're seeing that both in organized corporate life in the Nifty 50 and even in the unicorn world, we're seeing the same phenomenon. So we call it the rise of the regular Indian graduate. This is a newly educated Indian elite, no longer dependent on going to the right schools, the posh schools, and the posh universities.
No, this is an absolutely fantastic change because even I remember where there's this old boy network where a lot particular high schools or particular colleges have this network, and they if you you're hiring, you're in a company and you're hiring and you see somebody that has gone to the same college, then that used to hold a lot of weight. But I'm really glad to see that at least this weight is it's going more to merit, and it's not going to just your pedigree or from which organization that you studied from. That's fantastic.
So let me
So
just recount an anecdote on that. So recently, I was sitting at a dinner table in a restaurant near our office, and I was overhearing a conversation in the table adjacent to where I was sitting. This is in suburban Mumbai, Sharad. So there was one group of people in their mid 30s, and one group was saying that, look, we all belong to this elite Northern Indian school. I won't name the Northern Indian school in case the old boys from there are offended. Elite Northern Indian school, boarding school, and there's several of them were saying that, look, because we are part of this elite network, we're all in the know on what the latest greatest developments in corporate life in Mumbai are. Now, one of the people at that dinner table happened to be a regular graduate from Mumbai, and
right.
the guy sort of said wittily, half in jest and half in seriousness. But if you want to know the latest developments in corporate life, all you have to be is on social media. By and large, it's available there, and if not on Telegram, if you join the right Telegram groups, you can know whatever is the latest gossip in corporate life. And I thought that was a very telling remark that these gentlemen from this Northern Indian boarding school believed that they were in some access to some privileged information, and they were educated, I think rightly so, by their fellow diner, that if you just join the right chat group on social media, you'll know whatever's happening in Bombay boardroom life.
Yeah, this is the democratization that you were talking about, and I mean of democratization of even information. That's great to hear. But the other trend that you talked about is the rise of small
Mhm.
town elites and something that you call the octopus. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this concept?
So this is a subject where we hit upon this a year ago. A big part of our clientele, a big part of Marcellus's clientele, Sharad, comes from small town India. Places like say Erode in Tamil Nadu, Madurai in Tamil Nadu, Kolhapur in Maharashtra. Nandita just referenced Kolhapur in Maharashtra, Kanpur in UP, Agra in UP. right? And as we traveled around small town India, Nandita locked into this phenomenon that we call octopus. Now, since she sort of identified this before I did, I'll request her to elaborate upon this.
Sure. So whilst we were traveling last year to across the length and breadth of this country, we came across this concept, and it quite it actually just blew our mind because we had not latched onto it before, and it was so obvious. Just to give you an example here, I'll explain this through an example because that's how we also understood it. Let's just take a grain trader in a small town in Maharashtra. Okay, let's just consider that example. So for years, these traders have been trading in those grains and trying to earn a living from that, and running a business successfully. The smartest of these grain traders, what they do is they'll save up whatever they earn from the trade practices, and one day open a cold storage. They'll hire a cold storage for their grains. What this does is basically increase the shelf life of their produce. That gives them the benefit of selling it at a later date at a higher price. When that happens, their profits obviously increase, so they start earning more cash from whatever business they're running it more efficiently. Now, where to deploy this excess cash? What they then do is, let's say, open up a two-wheeler dealership. Now, two-wheeler dealership, again, they keep this process on because they're smart. They're able to turn their business around quite quickly, and they start earning more cash from that. As soon as this happens, they say, okay, let me open up a four-wheeler dealership now. So the aspirational quotient also keeps rising here. So they open a four-wheeler dealership. So slowly and steadily, they start building up their whole empire like this in the small town India.
And these are
Once their
the
son,
octopus.
Yeah, this is the
yes,
octopus, and what Nandita is giving is the kind of development of the octopus, right? So
Of the arms
the
of the
octopus is spawned, and the octopus then does two-wheeler, then four-wheeler, and then the inflection point, Sharad, will be the kind of the patriarch of the family will either get himself or usually his son or daughter into the local Zilla Parishad, into local government
right.
politics, right? So you need there'll be local government elections. You need to bankroll that, in a large district in Maharashtra or indeed in northern India, you'll need to spend a fair bit of money. So something like 30-40 lakhs if you want to win a Zilla Parishad election. But the local octopus, the patriarch, will get his son or daughter into municipal corporation life or Zilla Parishad life. And that will then give them visibility on local government construction contracts, road contracts, local building contracts. They will then become contractors for road construction or civil construction in that Zilla. And that's the next layer of profits, right?
they even become real estate developers.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
the next layer
So,
again.
now the real estate developers, you have access to information. If you're part of the local government, you know where the next set of roads are going to go through. So you're then able to buy land. They're able to buy land before anybody else can. And then, as Nandita said, you become a real estate developer. And over a 20-year period, these people will become not just the economic elite in that town or Zilla, they'll also become the political elite, right? If they are assiduous enough, MLA or MP is not out of question. Right, so the MLA or MP will have the political power. His son-in-law, daughter-in-law will run the Maruti dealership or the Hero dealership or the Bajaj dealership, Ashok Leyland dealership, etc. Then you move on to mobile phone dealerships, move on to consumer durable dealerships, and effectively economic life, political life, and social life will get dominated by, say, 20 such octopus families in a typical small town with, say, less than 200,000 people.
Yeah, and why we
Fascinating.
call it the octopus? Because they have their tentacles, so as to say, in all sorts of economically lucrative businesses. So that's
Right.
why the name octopus. And as Saurabh rightly said, that any small town below the population of, let's say, around 50,000 50,000 people will have at least 2 to 3 such octopus families. If you go one notch higher than that, let's say a million, you'll find 20 to 30 such families who control the economic wealth and the political wealth in that particular area. If you go to tier 2, tier 1 cities like Pune or Lucknow, you'll find around 100 to 300 such families. And then if you go on to bigger cities like Mumbai or Delhi, you'll find easily 1,000 to 2,000 octopus families over there who control 80% of the wealth and have reasonable political clout.
Right. No, this is absolutely fascinating because what you've said is simultaneously insightful, but also so obvious because now once you explain it, to me it seems that yes, of course, this is how it happens, but it takes somebody like Saurabh Mukherjee and Nandita to actually spot it and explain it. But now this octopus, the rural Indian octopus, is different from the octopus that you have seen in the big cities, right? The and in corporate
Yeah.
India.
Yeah. So big city octopus. Somehow it feels nicer if you describe the small town elite, calling them octopus. But you're absolutely right, Sharad. The mirror has to be held to us itself. So big city octopi operate in a slightly different way to the small town elite. The main difference is in big cities, you're sweating your intellectual property, you're sweating your brain, your know-how to become an octopus. And broadly speaking, so there's a three tier formula to becoming a big city octopus, right? First is you become a senior executive in a company that's doing well, right?
Right.
Most successful Indian companies are able to grow their profits at 20%, and if you're a senior executive in a successful company growing profits at 20%, that means effectively every 3 years or so, your own compensation is doubling. Over the course of a decade, your compensation goes up anywhere between 5 to 10x, right? So if you work in a super successful company like a Bajaj Finance or Asian Paints or HDFC Bank, your compensation goes up closer to 8 to 10x. And if you operate in a more modestly successful company, your compensation over a decade will go up 5x, right? That's the first layer where you participate in the corporate's profitability surge. The second is that if you rise to becoming, say, one of the top 10 executives in a listed entity, right? Remember, there are 6,000 companies listed in the country. At least the top 1,000 have fairly well chalked out ESOP, employee stock option programs. So if you're a top 10 executive in a successful listed entity, you'll be given stock, that company's stock. And remember, ESOPs are usually given at huge discounts to fair value. And if you are part of a successful company's ESOP program, anywhere between 10 to 20x wealth multiplication is within the horizon. So the first layer of wealth was your salary and bonus. The second layer of wealth is your ESOPs, right? Then comes the third tier of wealth multiplication. You are successful in a well-known listed entity, but you're an ambitious young man or woman in India. So you leave the listed entity, you quit your job, and you do a startup with your savings. You do a startup. Any number of venture capital firms or private equity will run after you to fund your startup. And even if you put in a couple of crores of your savings in the startup, with PE and VC funding, that company's valuation will grow manifold. As of today, there are around 100 unicorns in India. That's $1 billion plus valuation. But if you take smaller startups, you're looking at several thousand smaller startups whose valuation, Sharad, are anywhere between $20 million to below a billion, right? So if you add up these three layers: salary bonus, first layer; employee stock option plan, second layer; and then the ultimate nirvana in urban life in India. You set up your company, it becomes a successful startup, you get funded by large VCs or PEs, and you become a millionaire dozens of times over, right? If you add up this phenomenon, you're looking at something like 20,000, 30,000 Indians who are not of a business background conventionally. These are people who started out in executive life, but they go on to be worth dozens of millions of dollars, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is the urban octopi. And previously, the grain trade example Nandita gave is the small town octopi.
Yeah. And this would tie up to the first elite that you talked about the non-elite educational institutions, kind of the elite, right? Because
That's right.
these,
So the urban one, yeah, you're right. The urban elite are non-elite education institutions. By the way, some of them could have gone to IITs, IIMs, or
of course,
the global elite. But increasingly, as we are discussing, it's no longer a prerequisite. I think the most notable example we like to cite is HDFC Bank, right? It's the most valuable private sector bank in the country, worth well closer to $150 billion now. And barring Sashi Jagdishan, the CEO, barring Sashi, nobody else in the board is either IIT or IIM or overseas educated. They all studied in a famous university called the University of Mumbai, right? And HDFC Bank's ascendancy to the commanding heights of Indian capitalism without elite education, I think, is emblematic of the rise of the regular Indian graduate, and they then become the white collar octopi in the big cities. The rural octopi, the small town octopi, is a different dynamic. These are opportunistic entrepreneurial people who might not even be class 10 pass, who might be class 5 pass, but as Nandita explained through that lovely grain trader example, grain trader, cold storage, two-wheeler dealership, four-wheeler dealership, local government, civil construction contracts, real estate building, and then onwards and upwards to becoming a member of the legislative assembly or a member of parliament.
Right.
And I think this is a natural outcome of what we discussed before this, the three drivers. The three drivers are nothing at the end of the day but enablers. They are just levelers, basically, using technology. So they're leveraging technology, something that we as Indians are really good at. And they're trying to bring a level playing field in whatever we do in our daily life as well, whether we like to believe it or not. So once that happens, this is a natural outcome. People who are far more enterprising, who are entrepreneurial, who have that smartness within them, they are going to rise.
Yeah,
and this is what we see.
I think this is a great point. A lot of people, right, both in India and abroad, they like to beat India up, saying you guys haven't done enough for the poor. Right? And perhaps that's a justified criticism. But the way we see it as business people is, if you create digital public infrastructure, and this is a term that Nandan has coined, if you create digital public infrastructure, the hardest working, the most entrepreneurial people will latch on to it, right? It's not as if the DPI is being created just for the business class or for the octopus class, but the octopus class are the smartest, hardest working people who are able to spot the opportunities created by DPI, and as they rise, we shouldn't beat up the country because the poor are falling behind. The nature of free market economic life is a specific economic elite will pull away from the rest. That's how free market economics works. DPI has acted as a very powerful enabler. Networking of India, the creation of digital public infrastructure, has acted as a force multiplier for this new economic elite.
But now this the third elite that you have identified, this
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine like that the old boy network has been discarded. That would have taken some years, but it's conceptually possible. But the third elite you're talking about is a caste based, where the old caste based elites are no longer the elites, and it's much more egalitarian, it's much more democratic. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I think you set the context perfectly, Sharad. I mean, historically, caste oppression was a major issue in India. I'm sure there are many people who rightfully believe caste oppression is still a pertinent social issue in our country, right? But what we can see beyond the affirmative action that was launched in India post 1947, that was accelerated post the Mandal Commission. What we can see beyond the affirmative action is the data on workforce participation. The data on workforce participation clearly shows that labor force participation of formerly oppressed caste, right, what the constitution calls scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, labor force participation is actually progressing fastest for the formerly oppressed caste, right? So labor force participation as measured by the Center for Economic and Data Analysis. I think this is part of Ashoka University. They have published solid economic studies that one can go to this. It's called the Center for Economic and Data Analysis, CEDA. You can go to the website and access the data. Right, labor force participation by the formerly oppressed caste is actually growing faster than it is growing for the supposedly privileged caste. Right. Similarly, data on blue collar wages points to the same item, that there is no difference in wages of various castes in blue collar professions, right? And what the reason this is happening is again economic growth and the scarcity of skilled labor, right? Economic growth at 6-7% over 30 years means that the job market creates opportunity for factory labor, for skilled labor, for truck drivers, for cooks, for mechanics, for plumbers, for florists, for various artisans. And honestly, I don't think anybody in urban or semi-urban Indian life has the time to check कि boss आपका caste क्या है, If you need electrical work done, you need carpentry work done, you need your goods dispatched, you need factory workers in a giant manufacturing setup. Nobody in their right mind has any time to bother about caste considerations anymore. You come in, you get paid fair wage, the market wage, what other people are getting, and you get the job done. And this, I think, is again a very interesting way that economic development has leveled the playing field. I don't think you and I can claim that some enlightened force has transformed economic opportunities and wage payments to the hitherto oppressed caste. This is pure economic forces leveling the playing field and taking caste out of consideration, especially when it comes to blue collar wages and blue collar employment opportunities.
I think this is quite an interesting point because if you want to give an anecdote, so if you have to look at all the countries in the world, the best, most free market economy that we know of is the United States. And if you look at the progression of Jews in that country who came in as migrants over there, obviously they were not afforded the best of the opportunities by a lot of means. And this happened in the 70s. So obviously there was a bit of anti Semitism that was also going on. Despite that fact, they are now the biggest trading community, the biggest business community in the United States.
Yeah, I think to be fair, America has had anti-Semitism for well over 200 years. You and I have read about it more recently, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and Nandita's analogy is beautifully made. And in spite of anti-Semitism, the dominant force in American economic life is are Jewish people, and again, their ascendancy is not because of enlightened considerations in American economic life. I don't think white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans said, "Let's roll out the red carpet for the Jews." The enterprise, the intelligence, the ability of the Jews to push themselves has driven them to the apex of American economic life. By the much the same is true for Indians in America. Right? I don't think American elite decided to roll the red carpet out for Indians. Just that the Indians worked harder, used more intelligence, and pushed themselves to the top of economic life. Much the same is happening in India, and in the blue collar part of our blue collar part of our economy, caste becoming a irrelevant consideration is part of that same economic dynamic.
Right. So now, so what does all of this mean for India, especially now as we enter what Modi ji would love to call the Amrit Kal till 2047, till we turn 100 years old? How will the rise of this new elite change how India grows and how it operates? What are the implications?
Right. So look, I mean, we are far from being a perfect society. I don't think anybody in their right mind will claim that we are a perfect society. We are far from being that. In fact, if you were to put some numbers around it, on a per capita income basis, Sharad, on a per capita income basis, we are the 140th poorest country in the world. I think there's only 180 countries in the world, right?
Right.
And we are, in the bottom decile in terms of per capita income. So there's a long way for us to go as an economy. There's a long way for us to go as a society. But the good news is that the nature of economic change, the nature of technological change, the networking of the country, the digital public infrastructure, what that has done is by fostering economic growth, it's made the country a more merit-oriented society, a more merit-oriented economy, right? And I find this insanely fascinating that you can have as much enlightened thinking and you might have a bleeding heart about how you want to uplift the oppressed and the poor, but it doesn't take you very far unless you have economic opportunity and you have the impetus created by economic growth. So the impetus created by 30 years of strong economic growth has meant that the country has become increasingly merit oriented. Who your mummy and daddy are, which posh school or college you went to, whether you speak the Queen's English or not, which club in Bombay you have gin and tonic at, is becoming gradually irrelevant. And as that happens, as your origins, your pedigree are no longer a key consideration, whether you're working in a boardroom in Mumbai or whether you're running a grain trading business in small town India, whether you're working as a blue collar laborer or you're aspiring to join India's white collar economy, as your pedigree and your birth and your economic origins are become less relevant, we create a more meritocratic society. And if given judging by the track record of the last 30 years, if we can sustain 6-7% economic growth over the next couple of decades, this becomes a better country to live in, work in. This also becomes a more fairer society. Perfection will elude us. Perfection's eluded most other countries. Perfection, utopia will elude us, but it becomes a fairer country and a fairer society. And so let's hope that the opportunities created by economic growth continue to abound, because that's the best way, I think, we move towards becoming a more equal society.
Right. So that's actually a perfect summing up. I have no further questions. Thank you so much for your time. And all of you who are watching, please join us next quarter for another fascinating discussion on a totally different but equally fascinating topic. Thank you so much.